If you think about the strategies and what works versus what doesn't work, that simple mind shift to accept that you are dealing with someone who has a childish mindset can really, really serve you well in the long run. Imagine you have a toddler who's hitting his brother with a toy. If you want that toddler to stop, what do you do? Now, I think that most of you will say that you need some sort of consequence. You might have said, take away the toy. That's a consequence. And some people would say, I will tell the child that I'm going to take away the toy if they don't stop hitting their brother with it. So now what happens if you tell the child you're going to take away the toy and you don't do it? So you outline the consequence very clearly, but you don't follow through. They're not going to trust what you're saying, and they're going to believe that they can get away with doing whatever it is that they're doing. They think it's hilarious. It's you that has a problem with it. So if you set that consequence and you don't take away the toy, what you're teaching that child is that there's really no consequence. And if you take away that toy sometimes and not others, it really sends the message that I might get in trouble for this. I might have that consequence I don't want, or I might not. So maybe I'll just keep going and see what happens. So when you're setting boundaries with a typical emotionally healthy adult, really all you need to do usually is just set the boundary. Just tell them, this thing you do, it's bothering me. Or I'm uncomfortable with this. When you do this, it makes me feel this way. There are so many ways you can set a boundary, but all you really have to do is set the boundary. And somebody who respects you and understands that you have a right to those boundaries is probably going to back off pretty quickly. So the mistake that so many of us make when we're trying to set boundaries with a narcissist is that we treat that person who, for all intents and purposes, looks like a functioning adult. We treat them as if they are an emotionally healthy, fully functional adult. Now, if you were to shift that mindset just a little bit and think about the analogy of the little boy who's hitting his brother with a toy, you pretty much know what you have to do, and you know that it's going to take the work and consistency to really get through. So you're probably not going to stand there with your hands on your hips saying, I need you to stop that. I need you to stop that. Please stop doing that. Please stop doing that. If you do that, you run the risk of the kid finding it hilarious that you just keep repeating yourself. And so they make kind of a game out of it, and they're enjoying getting this kind of reaction out of you. But if you shift your mindset to think of the narcissist like that little child, you're essentially doing the same thing if you don't set and enforce consequences, no matter how difficult they may be. So now I want to share with you my 4-step process for setting boundaries with a narcissist. And this will work as long as you are consistent. This is the system that I share in my Narcissist Immunity Bootcamp, which is still open for pre-order right now. There's a link in the description. So to remember this system, I like to use the analogy PASS, P-A-S-S. So the first step is to be prepared for any pushback, because there will be pushback. You will get that temper tantrum that you're expecting. There is no way that you can set boundaries with a narcissist without getting that pushback. And the reason is because you're taking that toy away from them. You are cutting off access to supply. And the supply in this case is usually your emotional reaction. But essentially, it is access to you. It's like they had an all-access pass into you and your life and your emotions, and they could pull the strings and do whatever they want, and all of a sudden you're revoking that. So they're going to throw a fit, and it's really important that you be prepared for that. Some of the things you might expect when you start setting boundaries with a narcissist is that they might play the victim, they might completely ignore your boundaries, they might steamroll you and just completely run over anything that you've said. And if none of that works, you can expect them to start searching for loopholes, to look for that wiggle room so that they can just get a tiny little inch and take a yard. So I do go into more detail on how to prepare for those things in the Narcissist Immunity Bootcamp. But for now, I want to give you a really important tip for dealing with this, and that is to look at it as if it's a sign, and it's a sign that your boundaries are working. If you're seeing any of these signs when you try to set boundaries with a narcissist, it is not your time to back down. it is your time to continue doing what you're doing and keep that consistency. And of course, with this, I always like to share a word about safety. If you feel like the narcissist in your life is somehow dangerous to you, or if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like setting these boundaries might be a threat to your personal safety, then don't do it. Safety always comes first. And in that case, I would say setting boundaries should definitely take a back seat to maybe getting somebody to mediate between you so you don't have to be face to face with this person. So the next step in the past process, the first one's be prepared. The second one is avoid blame. And this one can be a little bit difficult, especially when you're dealing with a difficult personality, because you're probably going to have a little bit of fight in you and you're going to want to let that out. But when you're setting boundaries and you want things to go smoothly, it's always better if the person is receptive to your boundaries, especially if you need to be having this conversation. So if you have a narcissist in your life that you are keeping around, that you're not going no contact with, most likely there's a reason that you need to be speaking with them. So when you set the boundary, you're going to avoid blame. You're not going to make it into an argument about why you need this boundary, and you are never, ever, ever under any circumstances going to defend your right to boundaries. That is a trap, my friends. Just walk into it knowing that it's a basic thing that you deserve as a human being, and it's almost ridiculous for you to have to defend that. It would be like defending your right to breathe. So one of my best tips for avoiding blame in presenting the boundary is to bring it back to the purpose of your conversation. So instead of saying, you do this and you do that, and every time you do this, what you might say instead is, when you do that, when you talk over me, when you call me names, the conversation always gets sidetracked, and that's not productive. So if we're going to have this conversation, I need it to be productive. And this is how it has to go. Bottom line, if you do this thing again, we're going to have to stop this conversation and revisit it at a later time. So the third step in the past system is to stay strong. And this one is about consistency. There may be times when you feel stronger than others, and that's completely to be expected. But it's really, really important to maintain consistency. Remember how it goes in the example with the child. If you sometimes take away that toy, and sometimes you don't, just because it's easier, just because you don't want to deal with the temper tantrum right now, you've got other stuff going on. If you don't consistently set that consequence and keep it, that's sending the message that the consequence is not always going to happen. So stand strong, and even if you feel like it's the last thing you want to do, it's really important to stick with those boundaries, stick with those consequences. You can set whatever consequence it is that you see fit, but one that usually works really well is ending the conversation. And number 4 in the past system is to be stoic. And that means no emotional response. So because narcissists do have some differences and they can handle things differently, situations, relationships are all different. I can't tell you how long this will take, but you can expect that it will happen gradually, that you will eventually teach them how to show you respect. You cannot teach them, unfortunately, to actually respect you, but you can train them to follow your rules more often. And I'm sure you can imagine how many headaches this is going to help you avoid in the long run. So like I said, I go into a lot more detail on all of this in my Narcissist Immunity Bootcamp. And we also cover emotional resiliency, which helps you keep those emotional reactions intact. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out the link in the description box. And if you're wondering about which boundaries you might want to set with a narcissist in your life, definitely check out this video right here where I covered 10 basic boundaries you need to set with any narcissist right away. So check that out, and I'll see you next time.